ship for loving me.
Greetings from Castle Goring, from Mickey, Aurora, and from me. First of all, I would like to thank absolutely everybody who sent wonderful birthday greetings and some of you who sent lovely presents. Thank you so much. I cannot tell you how touched I was. It's wonderful to be covered in appreciation and regard and liking and love. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And now, without further ado, because I have a lot of ground to cover today, an awful lot has been going on, let's put it that way, and I am really rather intrigued by some of what has been going on. So I am going to, without further ado, plunge in with what Anna Moore has to say. Lady C, 2 questions if I may. 1, I saw you on Can't Get the Staff years ago, and Grant Harrold was your butler. He's now written a book, and in today's Telegraph there's a very interesting account about his time in the King's service that contradicts Harry's recollections of the relationship between him, his father, and Camilla. Could you please let us know what to believe? And 2, I'll do 2 after I've done 1. Shall we do that? Okay. I first met Grant Harrold on the Woburn estate. It has to be 20-something or about 22 years ago, when the present Duchess of Bedford was still Lady Howland. She married the present Duke of Bedford, and she was known as Lady Howland. Then she became Lady Tavistock, the Marchioness of Tavistock. And then she became the Duchess of Bedford. And her daughter, Alexandra, was a baby. And Louise's mother, who is one of my dearest friends, and a mutual friend of ours whose name will remain unspoken because she's Hollywood royalty, and I'm not sure she will appreciate my mentioning her name, because when I mention things about Hollywood, people might think, and when I say Hollywood royalty, that she's the source, and that's not necessarily so. Let's put it that way. I have more than one Hollywood royalty friends. So let's leave it at that. But Grant was their butler. And I can remember it as if it were yesterday. Then when I was asked to do You Can't Get the Staff, Princess Katerina of Yugoslavia, who again is a very old friend of mine, she and Grant were in business together. I don't know if they're still in business together, but they were doing something to do with etiquette and etiquette classes. Princess Katerina is the late Prince Philip's great niece, and of course she's a cousin of the king. And Grant had been the butler of, by then, the king, who was then the Prince of Wales. And Grant was his butler for several years. And then I think in 2011, he was made redundant because they were starting to make preparations to wind down Highgrove. Grant was the butler at Highgrove. I mean, he'd travel with the king as well. You know, he'd go to Berkhall, he'd go to Balmoral, he'd go to wherever. But he was primarily the butler at Highgrove. And his special friend and partner was one of the head gardeners at Highgrove. And even after Grant ceased being employed at Highgrove, his partner remained and I think has only recently left the employ of Highgrove. And he has made the point that Highgrove has changed dramatically from the days when the king was using it as his home. It was really his primary residence. Well, now he's king, it's been downgraded and he had to turn it over to a corporation. So it's now run on a corporate basis. So, and believe me, when things are run on a corporate basis, it's completely different from when they are run personally. Grant is a very nice young man. He is very knowledgeable about certain things, but as with all staff, he knows a lot about a little and a little about a lot. And he does not have airs and graces. He doesn't do a Paul Burrell. He doesn't pretend to know what he doesn't know. He doesn't pretend to be the king's greatest friend. He is, and he's written this book, which incidentally, if you'd like me to review, I'll be happy to review it. And in it, of course, because the Telegraph has been writing about it. And in it, he makes the point that William and Harry were very, very relaxed about Charles marrying Camilla and very, very proactive in making it work, as indeed was Camilla. Now, I actually prefer, not only in terms of what I know, but in terms of reality, Grant's version of the relationship between Harry and Camilla to what Harry said in Spare. Harry's account was very variable, let's put it that way. And Harry was very unfair about and nasty about Camilla and about Charles. And Harry and William both knew that their parents were very unhappily married. And if Harry didn't know that the reason why the marriage broke up was not because of Camilla's existence, Harry needs to actually learn the realities of what happened with his parents. Because as I pointed out in both my Diana books, Diana is the one who broke her marriage vows first. I know people don't want to hear it, who think that Pollyanna is something that actually related to Diana, but the fact of the matter is that's the reality. And both boys at the time wished their father well, wanted him to be happy, and both boys also knew that Diana was not only intending to move on and had moved on with Dodi, having tried to move on with Hajnat Khan, who refused to allow her to hitch her wagon to his train, and that their mother understood that their father was going to marry Camilla, and Diana herself was fine about it. So I hope that answers the question, at least superficially. Now, and two, also in today's Telegraph, there's an obituary of the late and gorgeous Terence Stamp, who recently died. I seem to remember that you knew each other, but can't remember how I know that. If I'm right, can you tell us what he was like? This is how you know it. You obviously read it in my autobiography, because I don't think I have recounted very often my, shall we say, Terry story. It would have been June or July 1973, before I was married. I was here, and I used to have drinks parties every 2 weeks, maybe 10, 20 friends, and which in those days everybody did, I have to tell you. And Stanley Vaughan, who was a grand British Jamaican, married to Gloria de Pena, who was the richest woman in Colombia. But Stanley was gay, and they just had a lavender marriage. And Gloria was lovely, it has to be said as well. And they were in London, and Stanley had a set in Albany. Now, I noticed in the newspapers they're saying that he had a set in the Albany. No, it's not correctly called the Albany. It's called Albany. No definite article in front of it. I make that point for what it's worth. Albany is a residence off Piccadilly. It has its own courtyard. It goes to the back of the street, I can't remember the name now, that the Burlington Arcade is also very near. And so the Burlington Arcade also goes to that street. And there are sets which are various apartments. They can't be bought, they're rented. Stanley had a wonderful set that when he was in Jamaica, where he spent most of his time, or in Colombia, Tom Gallagher, who was the head of Daldane Burnbeck, if I remember correctly, Tom would actually rent it. And then when Stanley and Gloria came over, or Stanley on his own, Tom would move into the Connaught. And I did not fancy Tom. He tried to take me out. But I liked him so much that I passed him on to my cousin Tony. And she had quite a thing with him. So that sort of we were all very chummy and very cozy. And Stanley was coming to one of my drinks parties, and he rang me up and said, could he bring Terence Stamp, which is what we all called him. Terry was a huge star, but his career had sort of taken a dip because Terry had taken a huge dip. Terry had mucked Jane Shrimpton around so gloriously that she dumped him, but he was truly and desperately in love with her. And when he realized he destroyed the relationship between them, he went into a real slump, which lasted for quite a while. And he used to mooch around his set in Albany, smoking dope and taking drugs. And Stanley said he wanted to get him out of the rut, so could he bring him to the party, which he did. And I'd never met him before. And I greeted them, and then, having greeted them, did what every hostess does. You walk into the drawing room expecting your guests to be following you. Not a chance. Terry had bolted into the bedroom. So, and also, of course, everybody was dead eager to meet him because he was so good looking, and he thought his career was over. It wasn't, but he really mucked things up with he was very self-destructive, and he was very into the drugs, which was very unfortunate and really helped to destroy his possibilities, because he never became the huge star that he was expected to be. He was a big star, but he should have been one of the top 3 or 4. He wasn't. He may have been one of the top 20. And anyway, so Stanley came into the drawing room. I said, "Where's Terry?" He said, "Oh, he's in the bedroom." I said, "What's he doing in the bedroom?" He said, "Oh, he's cowering in a corner." I said, "What do you mean he's cowering in a corner?" He said, "He's cowering in a corner." He says he can't face anybody because nobody wants to see him. I said, "Ugh." And I marched into the bedroom, and there was Terry, cowering in the corner, stuck between the wall and the chest of drawers, like a sort of self-indulgent little child. I said, "Terry, what are you doing?" He said, "Nobody wants to meet a has-been." And even in those days, I was 23, but I was still mature enough, and I was still enough the person I am now to not put up with rubbish like that. So I thought, this is ridiculous. I just grabbed his hand, yanked him up, and said, "Terry, better to be a has-been than a never was." But the truth is, I was never into the druggy scene or people who were tuning out life on substances and dampening their feelings and their observations. Because the truth is, my life had been far more difficult than any of theirs, and I had learned one lesson in life, which was life needs to be confronted and needs to be appreciated, and you can't do it when you are dodging your responsibilities to yourself and to others. And also, he was gorgeous looking, but the truth is he was boring. He was really boring. And I didn't care how good looking someone was, and I certainly didn't care how famous someone was. And he really wasn't anywhere near as famous as most of the people I was mixing with, it has to be said. And if I sound grand, I'm sorry. It's just the way it was. And I just thought, no, thank you very much. But whenever we occasionally ran into each other, we were very cordial. But then I hadn't seen him for years, because he then, after this phase, he snapped back into shape. But I had no interest in having a relationship, even a particular friendship with him, because we never had a friendship. We had an acquaintanceship. And I saw him at something ages afterwards, and I didn't even bother to speak to him. Sorry. Sorry. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. Trisha Freeman says, would appreciate your thoughts on the Wales move to Forest Lodge in Windsor Great Park. How exciting. Again, thank you for a great conversation with Andrew Loney. To repeat, civilized with an exchange of ideas, enjoyed every minute. I even listened twice. Hugs from Florida. Thank you very much for that. It certainly got a lot of comment, both pro and contra. And in fact, Andrew sent me a comment which was very pro. So on his whatever, now I don't remember what it was on, but yes, I covered the move to Forest Lodge over the weekend. So I'm afraid to those of you who are members, bear with me as I slightly repeat some of what I said. It was always going to be on the cards that they would have to move from Adelaide Cottage. It's too small. Now, Forest Lodge is being refurbished, not at the expense of the state, but by William out of his own funds. I don't know why anybody would have any issue with somebody moving to a more appropriate residence for the Prince of Wales, because the truth is Adelaide Cottage was really primarily used as, for instance, Peter Townsend lived there with his wife. It was a grace and favour house for courtiers. Basically, it started, if I remember correctly, as a tea house for Queen Adelaide, who was King William IV's consort. So it was never envisaged that it would be the permanent residence of William and Catherine. But William likes basically a very middle-class existence. And that is the truth. And he likes coziness. And so Adelaide Cottage was available. They wanted the children to move out of London to have a more rural existence, which I understand. I moved out of London with my children for them to have a more rural existence. Admittedly, I did it in France, not in Windsor, but it doesn't alter the fact that it's a very good thing to do, because a rural existence is far more conducive to a happy childhood than an urban existence. I think it's a very good thing. Now, there's trying to make out that Forest Lodge is their forever home. That's they being the press. The press are trying to make out that Forest Lodge is the Wales' forever home. Well, it might well turn out to be. But equally, I really don't see how, when he's king, that it would be conducive to the rank for him to remain in Forest Lodge. Forest Lodge is smaller than Castle Goring. I mean, give me a break, you know. Let's leave it at that. Carl G says, I'd love to hear what you think of what all the papers are billing as Harry's secret tribute to Prince Philip to mark VJ Day. Oh, that's an interesting one. It's unbelievable. Harry and Meghan push their way into everything where they have no part, and if they had decorum and good taste, they would know, keep your noses, and I'm being polite, out of things. Harry is still acting as if he is a monarch in waiting or an exiled monarch. Harry makes pronouncements that William would never make. Harry sends on his own cognizance a letter with a wreath, and the letter is a diatribe of how important he is, that he is going to reward all those serving of men who lost their lives or never, and if they didn't lose their lives, helped to make us free. Who is Harry to be doing this? I mean, no other prince has ever done something like this. It is an attention grab. It's a way of him and Meghan, because she's also behind it, because he wouldn't be doing this on his own. Well, he might now be properly trained in the Meghan ways of doing things, but he would never in the past have done something like this, because he would have known how crass, vulgar, and inappropriate it is. He sends a long letter, not only congratulating and acknowledging the sacrifices that all these soldiers made. Notice, he didn't make any sacrifices, but he then mentions his grandfather. Now, what he doesn't say, but I'm going to tell you, is his grandfather was on the vessel, the naval vessel that took the surrender of the Japanese. It's in one of my books, I can't remember which one. This is the grandfather that when he was dying, he and his wife stated that they were not going to sacrifice their Oprah interview, which was going to be broadcast, unless his grandfather was genuinely not faking it and died just before, because they believed his grandfather, who was visibly dying, incidentally, and they knew was visibly dying. And they knew that he was dying, not only visibly, but they actually knew. I'm not going to tell you how I know they knew, but they definitely knew. And this is the grandfather whose dying days he despoiled and sullied. And he is opportunistically using Philip's name in this attention grab. The guy is not worth lavatory paper. Really, it's unbelievable. I mean, but let me rephrase that. He makes used lavatory paper seem clean. Let me rephrase it so you get the full extent of what I feel. I'm going to reiterate. Harry sneakily getting somebody to drop off a wreath with a long letter, an egotistical letter, an opportunistic letter, a letter that is despoiling and dirtying to everybody concerned, shows that Harry's demeanour is little better than somebody's. Well, let me compare Harry's demeanour, actually. It's not even clean lavatory paper. It's dirty lavatory paper. Let's put it like that. PQR says, Lady C, I read a most interesting article in the Mail over the weekend and wonder if you could have a look at it and give us your comments. Judy James, their behavioural expert, makes some interesting points about how everyone got Meghan and Harry's dynamic wrong in the early days of their marriage. Since you were the first author to point out how dominant she was in relation to him, I'd be intrigued to hear what you think. I think this article gets to the heart of the matter, the way you did and still do. Thank you for that, PQR. Well, my information was that Meghan gained an ascendancy over Harry on the second date, most likely had the ground laid on the first date. Everything Harry and Meghan have said subsequent to that shows this. Everything they have done shows that that observation was accurate. I'm not at all surprised that the mainstream media initially, because the article makes it clear that initially all the observers in the mainstream media thought that what was going on was not going on. I had no interest in the subject whatsoever. I still haven't seen the engagement interview in full. I saw some of the wedding because my husband wanted to see it, so we looked at it. It was fun. Not the bits about the Bible bashing, caterwauling, but the rest of it was fun. And incidentally, I loved how Grant Harrold in his memoirs makes that Prince Philip said how, well, he used a very colourful word beginning with F that has 4 letters to show how relieved he was that the ceremony was over. And I just throw that in as an aside. But Meghan is a dominatrix, and Meghan, by Harry's own account, has dominated him. By his own account, he was so desperate to meet her that he wet himself. Now, I'm sorry, if that is not an indication of not only desperation, but all sorts of very untoward things going on, I don't know what is. Once I was approached about what was going on, and I started to learn what was going on between Harry and Meghan, and how she was running riot at the palace, overturning every safeguard that she could so that she would be able to get her hand fully in the till to maximize her financial exploitation of the royal system. And then once I became aware of the fact that there was a huge problem and there was a huge disparity between the public perception of Meghan and the private reality, it's at that point that I became interested. And it's at that point that I then, after some toing and froing, decided to write Meghan and Harry, the real story. At which point I very quickly discovered the full extent of her domination and control over him. and how willingly, one could say almost destructively, he had relegated control to her. That told me that their relationship was on some level, in my opinion, very sick. And he, I'm trying to think of the best way of putting this. Their relationship, I'm just going to say it again because I actually have said it. Their relationship was, in my view, and still is, very sick. She is a controller and he has relegated control. That is very unhealthy. But it was very apparent to me once I became interested the full extent of her control over him. And in my book, I said that he was in her thrall. And one of the really rather ridiculous royal correspondents, the ones who sort of scratch around like chickens looking for food. I think his name, it might have been Duncan Lawnscombe or some such thing. Or it might have been another one whose name escaped me. But anyway, whichever one it was one from some hack from one of the really rather down-market newspapers, was rude to me on television, and remonstrated with me for saying what everybody now acknowledges is the case when I said it in my book. And, the chippy oik that he was, sort of like, how would you know? And how can you say that? And blah, 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 blah. And sort of the prissy, sanctimonious outrage of an ignoramus who is also a chippy oik. But that is what the mainstream media, that was their belief at the time, that it was a wonderful relationship. And when they discovered it wasn't, they still, the dishonorable little jerks that most of them are, they still persisted in trying to peddle the fiction to the public. So, but I'm glad that Judy James has been honest enough to acknowledge that she got it wrong, and that with hindsight, the evidence was there from the word go. I mean, it didn't take me several years to add up 2 and 2 when I saw 1, 2 beside the other. It took me a matter of weeks to make the connection once I had the information. And it's taken them years. No wonder people are going off the mainstream media. They're right to go off it because they are so irresponsible and they are so ignorant. Jane Watson says, "Good for you, Lady C. Andrew may well be an oaf, but I never believed that Virginia grifter. Also, how remarkable is it that Epstein was American? All his shenanigans were outside the US, well, not all, but most, as were the vast majority of his associates. But the only 2 people held accountable for his actions are British citizens, Andrew and Ghislaine Maxwell." Well, Jane Watson, thanks for that. That's been my message all along as well. And of course, I know things that I cannot say publicly, not only for legal reasons, but sometimes because I would be violating confidences and straying into areas that really it would not be appropriate for me to stray into. But I have been extremely forthcoming about what I know and why I know it and how I know it. And the fact that a lot of what I know is as a result of having been shown court records and written evidence of Virginia Giuffre's various contradictory statements over the years, and of police records going back to when she was a teenager, and court records going back to when she was a teenager, long before she ever knew Epstein. And it astonishes me that people just don't want to understand that she might have been a victim when she was 9 or whatever age it was that she claimed she was. I don't remember now. When she claimed that something untoward had happened within the family situation. But thereafter, one certainly by the time she was at Mar-a-Lago, she was no victim whatsoever. And by her own account, she was a perpetrator. And I don't know why it bothers people that because she was not the underprivileged creature as well that she has been made out to be. She had a trust fund from her mother's family. Her father's family might have been ordinary, but her mother's family were pretty privileged. And you notice you never hear a peep out of the mother. It's always the father. The one who used to take her to the airport so that she could catch planes to come back with thousands of dollars. I don't know. See, I'm maybe no mathematical genius, but I know what 2 and 2 make. And I'm delighted that you do too, Jane Watson. And I do know things that I cannot repeat publicly. And why am I so certain of certain things? Just because I can't repeat them doesn't mean that I'm not certain. I'm certain. County LT 25 says, who in recent marriages has money in the royal family? Prince Philip had none, the Spencers had some, Fergie's parents were not wealthy, nor Sophie the Duchess of Edinburgh, nor Mark Phillips. Correct? Absolutely correct. Diana was well off. Diana was an heiress in her own right. Through her mother, through her American great-grandfather, she had American money. Diana had money of her own. Not a vast fortune, but she was comfortable. Sarah had no money. Sophie Edinburgh was not from a rich family, but she was certainly from a comfortable enough family, but she wasn't a great heiress. Mark Phillips used to do PR and have appearances for Simpson's Piccadilly. I know this. Hetty Simpson was a great friend of mine. In fact, in my autobiography, I'll show you. There is a photograph there of Simpson's Piccadilly widow Hetty Simpson, seen here in the background, back to camera, talking to me, right, with her heiress daughter Georgina and her actor husband Anthony Andrews standing left. There we are at my Ascot picnic. They used to come to my Ascot picnics. Mark Phillips I used to see at Simpsons events. He was on the payroll. He didn't have any of his own money. They had to work. There's nothing wrong with having to work. In fact, I think it's very desirable that everybody should work. Even those who don't have to should, and certainly those who have to should as well. And quite frankly, I'm sick and tired of people who should, who don't, so that people who actually do have to end up supporting them. But it's a useful observation to make. I can't think of a great heiress who has married into the royal family in the last century. Can't think of one, save for Edwina Ashley, who married Dickie Mountbatten. Now, she was a great heiress. The rest of them, no. And Dickie Mountbatten was really on the periphery. He was a member of the extended royal family, but he really wasn't a member of the royal family. So on that note, I'll say thank you very much for listening. I hope this has been of some interest to you. If it has, please keep the questions and comments coming in so I will know what ground you would like us to be covering together. Thank you so much. Take good care. And if you have truly enjoyed this, would you care to like, share, subscribe, press the notification bell, and Godspeed. Bye-bye.